And welcome to the February 9th meeting of the Indian River County Planning and Zoning. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Sam.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I know some of you may be a little surprised to see me back here since I did resign. However, Mr. Davis has asked me to just temporarily fill in until he finds a replacement. First item on the agenda tonight is the election of chairman and vice chairman. At this point, I will turn the meeting over to Bill DeBraw.
Thank you, Ms. Keyes. First item of business is election of a chairman. I open the floor to nominations. Anyone have any nominations?
Yeah. Yes, I'd like to nominate Sam Zimmerman as chairman.
Second.
Are there any other nominations? Close the floor to nominations. All those in favor of Sam Zimmerman for chairman, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye. I'd like to nominate Jen Stripson as vice chair.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any other nominations? I close the floor to nominations. All in favor of Mr. Tripson as vice chair, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Mr.
Jen,
Chairman.
I'll be more than happy to switch seats with you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the first item that we have to do is move item 5 off of a public hearing. It's not a public hearing, if I'm correct there, Stan. That needs to be moved to 4B.
Do we need a motion for that, or can we just go ahead and...
No motion needed.
Okay. And then can we move back to item 3, approval of minutes?
Yes.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That passes. Our first item this evening is item 4A, which is the Lakes at Waterway Village. First, I'm going to ask if there are any ex parte communications that have occurred amongst any of the commissioners that would lead to an unbiased decision, and we can just go down the line here, starting with you, Mr. Day. Dr. Day.
No.
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 None for me.
No.
No.
Okay, the Lakes at Waterway Village. This is a request for preliminary plan development PD approval for phases 2A and 3A of Waterway Village to be known as the Lakes at Waterway Village. Devasta Homes LP, the owner, Arcadis U.S. agent. And I'm going to turn this over to staff now.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Zimmerman. John McCoy with the County Planning staff. And this is a request from Waterway Village for preliminary PD approval. And we have it labeled as Phase 2, although it actually has components of Phase 2 and Phase 3, as the applicant has phased the plan. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in just a second. The subject site is in the south central portion of the overall Waterway Village, and it's outlined in red on the aerial. And it comes down to 49th Street at the southern end, and then runs up what will be the future extension of 43rd Avenue on the east, and then internal on the western portion, and does not reach all the way to 53rd Street at the north end. This is the location within the overall conceptual plan. And the dividing line between phases 2 and 3 on the conceptual plan is this lake that runs sort of east and west at an angle. Everything south of that is phase 2. Everything north of that is phase 3. The area that they're looking at doing first is building homes within this area, which is in phase 3. And the reason for that is twofold. One, they're going to build new models, and this will be a new model center. So this will contain many of their new models that they're hoping will be more relevant in the current real estate market. And secondly, this portion of the project orients towards 53rd Street much better, which is a newly improved roadway running from US 1 to 58. So they're looking at orienting a little bit more to the north, and that's the reason for really advancing this portion of phase 3 in advance of other portions of phase 2. This southern portion is part of phase 2, and that'll probably be the second portion of this actual construction. This is an aerial overlay, shows a detail of the area. There'll be a little bit more lake expansion in this, especially at the southern end, but it gives you a pretty good feel. There's an existing portion of the lake has been dug, the lots, and then a recreation facility centralized between the two phases. Next is the layout, and again showing the recreation area, the first phase to be done. Second phase, it's just a little under 70 acres, and it's 129 units in total for the two phases. Again, bordered by future 43rd Avenue on the east, 49th Street on the south, and 51st Court. And let me talk a little bit more about that from a traffic circulation perspective. The access will be from 51st Court, which is constructed, and the project will enter at this point. And then access to the southern portion will come down Waterway Boulevard to this portion and to the recreation complex. This portion of Waterway Village will be stabilized and constructed for emergency access points, because this portion of Waterway Village Boulevard will be the only access to these lots in the interim until this portion gets built, or until 43rd Avenue gets built up to a point north and the roadway is connected. Ultimately, there will be several ways in and out of this, but for the interim, they'll just be the one with the emergency access. Related items are transit stops, and the transit stops are being coordinated through our MPO department, and they're looking at potentially 2 on 49th Street on the south side of the project, north side of 49th Street, and they're working with our MPO as far as location and timing. Timing may change a little bit. Both may not be needed prior to certificate of completion for this, but what we want to have is the location and the timing figured out by that point in time. And the next item is Gifford landscape improvements. Both of these, the transit stop and the Gifford Park improvements, are items that were in the original development order that we approved back in 2005. Many of you were here for that development order. So these conditions are just continuing to roll through the development. As the development progresses, we're trying to make sure that all these development order conditions are met. These are 2 items that were development order conditions. And the concept with the Gifford Park improvements is the applicant would design a landscaping for Gifford Park using landscape elements that were used within Waterway so as to blend the 2 projects and have a little bit more unity in the design, so there's not an abrupt change from one side of 49 to the other. And this was a public area where that could be done. So that's what's been done. And next, I'd just like to touch a little bit on the improvements. This is an aerial of the park and a concept of the landscape plan. This northern section, section 1, is fronts on 49th Street, and it's a native area. It's very well landscaped with native material, and there's really no need for any improvements here. Section 2, fairly similar. There are some gaps that need to be plugged, and that's what the landscape plan calls for, plugging those gaps. There's also some nuisance vegetation in section 2 that'll be removed, and those gaps, once they're created with the removal of that nuisance vegetation, will be infilled. Let me just talk about section 5, since it sort of comes in next as far as just in the path. They'll provide a couple flowering trees here really just to dress that up. In section 3 is the parking lot landscaping adjacent to the Gifford Youth Activity Center, the GYAC. That's in really good shape. A lot of oak trees, hedge underneath, really no need for any work to be done there. Really the majority of the landscape to be done is a landscape plan for this area, which will include a lot of those common landscape materials between the 2 projects. The applicants provided us with an acceptable plan for that area, and again, that would need to be done prior to the certificate of completion for phase 2. And staff is coordinated both with the applicant and with the members of the Gifford community. Next, I'd like to talk about the landscape plan for the actual development. And it's broken into 2 halves. This is the north half. And 51st Court, while it bisects the project, is a public road. So members of the public can go through the project on 51st Street. The gated entrance is at this point, and the applicant's essentially doing a 6-foot berm, landscape berm, very similar to what you see on the 49th Street frontage or 58th frontages. So that will be the landscape theme that's carried through this area. Internal to the project, there'll be a street tree plan. The blue is denoting littoral zones that'll be in the water, and then there'll also be lake shoreline trees. At the very south end, you see that dash line, that's the match line to the next slide. And this sits just below that northern portion. And again, the landscaping theme is the same. Street trees along the internal streets, lake shoreline trees, littoral zones within the lakes, and then on the perimeter adjacent to 43rd Avenue, which will be a public street that will bisect the project, the perimeter buffer, which is consistent with what's out there today. With that, I would like to get to the recommendation. Staff does recommend approval with the conditions as outlined in the staff report. Thank you.
Is there a presentation that the applicant would care to make? No? Any fellow commissioners have? Oh.
This is they had a DRI on this, and this came up in detail when they initially started the project. There was a lot of questions about traffic, and I believe the DRI is in place. And so this is really just following through in a small amount of detail with what they've done in the past.
Mr. Chairman, this is a quasi-judicial matter, so if the clerk could swear in any witnesses that are going to testify.
Please do so.
Anybody that's going to speak on this, could you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Bob Lawson. I'm with Arcadis U.S. We're the agents for this. My address is 2081 Vista Parkway, West Palm Beach, Florida, 33411. What I wanted to say is I thought John did a wonderful job of explaining exactly what the project is. We've thoroughly reviewed the conditions that have been placed on it, and we agree with the conditions as written. That's all I had.
Any comments from anybody in the public tonight? Any discussion amongst the commissioners?
I had a question for staff. On page 3, under the littoral zones, I didn't remember when this was drafted, when the littoral zones were done for the lakes. It goes out 40 feet. Is that correct? I mean, that's what it would take to get a 40 square foot per one foot of shoreline.
It's the way it was done. It was, in this particular case, it was done through the development order, and the criteria were into the development order. And the way Waterways designed it, and typically we find this to be the preferred method from a homeowner standpoint, is that there's not littoral zone behind the residence, but the littoral zone tends to get clustered and grouped in areas where it's an expanded area, so it's not a evenly distributed rim, but it's more expansive in areas where there are no homes, and that's what they've attempted to do.
Thank you.
I also have a question. What is the definition of street trees and lakeshore trees?
Street trees are canopy trees. They're 12 feet tall at installation, and they're typically a tree like an oak. The lake shoreline trees are trees that are usually associated with water. They can be maples, cypress, those types of trees, and they're actually 5 feet tall at the time of planting. So they go in as a smaller tree. The canopy trees for the street trees go in as a larger tree, just to have a quicker visual impact.
Any further discussion?
Yes, I love the new boulevard. That is so nice. So nice.
Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 4B, is that correct, Mr. Cabral? Is that the next quasi-judicial hearing, which is the dismissal of George Mabe's appeal of the County Community Development Director's decision to find no vested rights and to deny Ocean Concrete's site plan application for a concrete batch plant. I'm going to ask again, we can go down the line, if there's been any ex parte communication that would keep you from making an impartial decision on this matter.
None.
No.
No.
No. No.
No.
No.
No.
We have to do another swearing in, or are we good for,
Yes, you can go ahead and swear the witnesses.
okay?
Anybody wishes to speak? Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
I'll start, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations. Condolences.
I think. Thank you, I
You're
think.
welcome. You're welcome.
He understands he has to be at all the meetings.
This item is actually narrow in scope. The issue is whether or not to dismiss an appeal that's been filed by George Mabe. And I'll just summarize some of the information in staff's backup material. And that is simply this, that Mr. Mabe filed a site plan application for the Ocean Concrete Project up in the North County area. And through a series of events, that application was extended. And by spring of last year, it was reviewed by staff, and it was a type of application that staff had the authority to approve or deny. Staff denied the application, and Mr. Mabe appealed that denial. Last summer, while staff was coordinating with Mr. Mabe and Mr. Mabe's attorney on when to actually hold the hearing for the appeal, that appeal comes before this body, before the Planning and Zoning Commission. While that was going on, there were also other events going on that ended in a transfer of ownership of the property, again, as described in staff's report. And you probably recall that last October, staff gave you all an update on the status of the appeal and the other events that could affect the appeal. In November, ownership was transferred from Mr. Mabe to LNV Corporation. And when staff became aware of that, in November, staff wrote Mr. Mabe and gave him a 30-day period to show that he had authorization from the new owner to proceed. The theory being there that ownership or authorization from the owner of the property is necessary for the site plan application, any appeal that comes from that. The code provisions are cited in staff's report. Staff did not get a response from Mr. Mabe or Mr. Mabe's attorney. After 45 days, staff sent a letter to Mr. Mabe saying that we would take this matter to the Planning and Zoning Commission at a hearing this evening for the P&Z to consider dismissing the appeal because of a lack of authorization from the owner. And that is the issue before you all tonight. The two main points here being that an application for site plan approval has to be from an owner or an authorized agent of the owner. That authorization has not been provided to staff at this time, and so it's appropriate for the P&Z to consider dismissal, and that is what staff is recommending. At this point, I'd like to ask if the county attorney would like to come forward and provide any other details with respect to the consideration of dismissal.
Good evening, Alan Plaquich, County Attorney. The only thing I'd add is if you look at the proceeding that started out, we had a denial of a site plan application. We had an appeal of that denial. The request sought was to approve the site plan application. At this point, Mr. Mabe neither owns the property nor does he have the authorization from the owner to proceed. Under that circumstance, this board really has no ability to grant him the relief he was seeking, which is approve the site plan application. We've kind of crossed the line between an actual dispute, which is where we were, and now we're just into an advisory situation because there is no, actual issue before the board any longer. So it was my opinion, based on the code, based on the fact that he no longer had ownership, or he never had authorization from the owner, that there was no longer an issue left for appeal, so the only result is dismissal of the appeal.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Alan, going back to when I read through this, it was kind of strange in the sense that I thought the same thing. I'm not sure exactly why this is even in front of us.
And I would tell
a dismissal of an appeal based on what you're saying is almost would seem automatic. And going back to action here, we need to take action, or the only action we can take is to tell you, the county, to dismiss the appeal?
Well, we didn't take the appeal. Mr. Mabe took the appeal and filed it with this board, and once he filed it, it was now before this board.
So the only thing, if we can't continue an appeal that does, then the only action we have is to dismiss the appeal, just do away with it in front of us.
I believe that's accurate.
If we do nothing, I mean,
Well, it's still at that point kind of suspended in an unresolved status. Staff came to me and believed that they would simply dismiss the appeal.
Yeah.
And I told them I didn't really think.
We had to do it because it was in front of us.
Once it's filed and once it's kind of before the board, I didn't really feel like staff had the authority unilaterally to take it away from the board.
Rather than leaving it suspended, if we dismiss it and he gets authority from the new owner, what happens?
Well, at that point, the easy answer is that he could now file a new site plan application.
He would start a new appeal process or something based upon the new owner's authority.
I don't know that it would be I mean, that's where it starts becoming difficult. Is there any way to pick up the old process, which I can't really think right now. If the old process is terminated, it's terminated. I think he could initiate a new process based on the authorization.
He would just have to start over.
Correct.
But when you sent notice, you also sent it to the new owner, right? Didn't I see that you would CC'd them? So both parties were made aware of it, and there was no response from either, correct?
Correct. There was no response from Mr. Mabe. We had a response from LNV, not that they were giving any authorization. In fact, they were basically asking for money not to give authorization, which we did not do.
Let me understand it. Let me see if I understand you correctly. LNV, who is the new owner, expressed their desire that we essentially act as staff has recommended and terminate this appeal. Is that correct?
No, they contacted us and said, in effect, they were going to give, they would consider giving authorization to Mr. Mabe unless we paid the money. And we said, we're not going to pay you any money.
Why would we pay them money?
Well, because they wanted it. But there was no reason for us to do that, which is why we shut that discussion down. But you asked whether we had any contact from LNB. That was the contact we had.
Okay.
And since I'm under oath, I certainly need to tell you, to answer that question.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer.
And as far as at close of business today, you had not heard from LMB that they had given Mr. Mabe authorization?
No.
So back to action. We really have, the only action we have is dismiss or do nothing. I mean,
well, the appeal has been filed, in front of you. In the eyes of, for example, if this were a court situation, a complaint was filed in the court then takes jurisdiction and basically has control of that proceeding. And at that point, if there is a basis for dismissal, which is being raised today, the action would be that the court would dismiss it. So we're trying to treat this formally. As I say, staff believed that the better way to proceed was simply dismiss it, but I personally felt the better way was to bring it to the board and have an official dismissal of that appeal.
Any other questions of the county attorney?
No, I'm anxious to hear the other side.
Yeah, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, so if there's anyone here from the other side, please come up and we just need your name and address, please.
Todd Smith, 21 Hampshire Avenue, engineer for Ocean Concrete. The impetus tonight's motion is before the board has been based upon Mr. Mabe's loss of title through the foreclosure action. And what the PZC needs to be aware of is that this foreclosure action is in the appeals courts. And this is America. Mr. Mabe should be given the opportunity for that court to hear his appeals of the foreclosure. There is a very strong possibility that that appeals court will restore Mr. Mabe's ownership, which then you have the right for his appeal to be heard on the site plan, which really should be heard by these courts months and months ago for the delayed tactics that have taken place. So to reiterate some of the comments that were said earlier, one of the actions that we are in is for the PZ to do know. Why is this motion before you tonight? Why is it being forced upon you as a dismissal for staff to put a little bow on this and say, yes, Ocean Concrete's done. We've hammered them into the ground. This project's closed. It's not closed. It's just the beginning. There's a lot of court action to come on. And there's no reason that this particular dismissal action could not come before this board a month from now, a year from now, after the appeals court is ruled. If the appeals court upholds the foreclosure, fine, done. Come back before PZ at that time and do the dismissal. Give Mr. May the opportunity to have his day in court but his day before these boards, so all the truths associated with this project can be heard to the public, because we've never been given the opportunity through, and what I find ironic is the dismissal of the appeal. The public deserves to know all the questionable tactics and reviews, taxpayer money that's been spent, that's been associated with this project. All we're asking for is a day to speak for everyone that give us the opportunity to listen. But in conclusion, I would respectfully ask the PZ table this tonight, let the appeals court finish out their review of the foreclosure, and then review this matter at a later date. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Can I ask Alan a question?
Yeah, you need to go ahead and address that.
Thank you.
The foreclosure court entered a final judgment of foreclosure against Mr. Mabe and went forward to a sale. Mr. Mabe filed an appeal to this was in the Federal District Court, if you believe it, and the appeal was filed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal. Mr. Mabe then filed a motion with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal asking that the appellate court enter an order staying the foreclosure sale until the appeal was resolved. The appellate court entered an order concluding that, in effect, they did not believe there was a reasonable likelihood he would prevail in the appeal, therefore denied the stay motion. The foreclosure court then ordered that the sale take place. The sale took place. Title has been divested. So that's why we brought it forward. I mean, frankly, I don't have a problem if you want to table this until their appeal is resolved. It doesn't bother me one bit. I kind of wish, as we've been sending them letters since November 28, they had proposed that to us prior to right now. But you know, I personally don't have a problem if you want to stay it. And that way, the question that was asked earlier by Mr. Hamner, you know, what happens if, well, in that unlikely event, rather than have the guy go back and start all over, we could just pick up where we are and complete it. So, you know.
So the appeal has not been resolved?
Correct.
And where exactly does it stand?
Well, the appeal got delayed because Mr. Mabe filed a bankruptcy. So, you know, I've picked up bits and pieces of what's going on in the appellate court. As to where it stands right now, I can't tell you how close they are to resolution. I know there was a period of time where the bankruptcy, where the appeal court, if I recall correctly, was having Mr. Mabe file monthly status reports as to what was happening in his bankruptcy. Now the bankruptcy has been concluded because that was dismissed by the court in December 2011. So I assume that now leaves the appellate court free of the bankruptcy to proceed with the appeal. But I really don't know what's happened in the appellate court the last 60 or 90 days.
And the matter at issue is ownership?
Yeah, he's contesting the final judgment of foreclosure that the foreclosure court entered. So theoretically, if he wins, what happens is the case goes back to the foreclosure court to, I guess, reconsider the appeal. Title at that point kind of remains in a suspended status because it has transferred. Title, you know, the deed has issued to LNV. So all of that kind of gets frozen until the foreclosure court resolves whatever issues might come back from the appellate court.
Alan, backing up to the time frame that we are operating in the county and you all are operating in, once the sale occurred and the title transferred, that was when we noticed Mr. Mays about the situation that you could continue only if you had notice from the owner. Is that correct?
Correct. Title transferred on November 11th. The U.S. Marshal signed the deed transferring title to LNV. That deed was recorded on November 18. On November 28, we sent our letter to Mr. May saying you no longer have title. You can only proceed if you have authorization.
So we have, within the ordinances, we have a time frame that we expect reply. But if he did not reply within, what was it, 30 days or 45 days?
I don't think there is a specific time. We chose 30 days, and we also said if you need more time, let us know. But we never had any response to that letter.
I mean, I'm interested why they didn't respond or do something. They wait till tonight, but but within the time, with the ordinance level, we don't have that specific time frame other than in your letter requesting it.
Correct.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Oh, no.
Could you state your address for the record, please?
4659 Southeast Main Street, Seward, Florida. Response to Mr. Blackwood's answer to all of this. Title did change in November. I paid for my appeal in May. The county attorney continued to deny that opportunity, basing his judgments on a bankruptcy and an impending foreclosure, all of which, during that time, I had authorization from the bankruptcy court to proceed. I also remained owner until November. So during this period of time, Mr. Polakowicz was more than happy to offer a third party this opportunity, but not me, after 8 years. And I would think that any objective government looking at the impending doom over this thing would have given me that opportunity. And this board had that opportunity, and that was denied to me as well. I paid for this appeal. It should have been heard. Excuse my frustration. I do not direct it to you, but this has been years of improprieties, and when this is over with, two things. The potential for me to win this appeal in the Southern District in Atlanta. It has not been stalled because of the bankruptcy, as Mr. Polakowicz has stated. It has got national implications, and it will be ruled on accordingly. Same thing as this case. In this country, what has happened here is the continuing deprivation of my rights, and it occurred right up until this day. And this action here is premature. Until I have a proper ruling, I think that the denial of my vested rights will be ruled upon by a court of law and a judge, because we've had no opportunity to exercise that here. So if there's any closure here tonight, it's closure for me, because I no longer have to deal with staff. I no longer have to deal with the county commission, the people that perpetuated the loss of this property. So from here forward, I've been on the receiving end of this now for 8 years. Unfortunately, what comes next is going to be a terribly uncomfortable situation for all the parties involved. And when it's done, this will all be reversed. I will have the opportunity to exercise my rights because they've been stolen from me. And I would request to leave this thing and let the court decide. If you'd like closure, you want to finish this thing tonight, so be it. The way this thing has ended for me, my last opportunity to speak to this board, it was a meeting concerning an update of this foreclosure and my rights. Mr. Polakowicz did not disclose the federal appeal, and we've moved forward. This is the first time anybody's heard about it. He also didn't disclose the fact that he made a settlement attempt to purchase my company, my rights, my property, the rights to this litigation. He says it's worthless, but he was willing to pay $25,000 of public money expended in a settlement agreement that was done not in the sunshine. Sunshine law says all settlement agreements must be done in the public eye. Mr. Polakowicz has circumvented the sunshine and used this in coordination with Joe Beard. They have the ability to write a $50,000 check with no authorization. Well, I assure you this is no public works project.
This has to do with my site plan and my property rights. And as perverted as it may be, these guys tried to buy the rights to relief, the same individuals that caused the damage. And I have a question about all that itself. But nevertheless, and I'll make it quick, we're done here. You rule how you think you need to rule. But this case, in this country, for political reasons, staff's got lots of questions to answer. Members of the county commission have things to answer. And I'm going to find out where the money went. Because I know that there's been $160,000 some odd dollars that have changed hands illegally in this process. And I can't get anybody to take a look at it, so I'm going to do my own investigation. And it's going to come forward here pretty quickly because we have the opportunity to finish this process and get where this is always belonging in court of law. So I'm frustrated. My damages are through the roof at the loss of this property. And I'm here to tell you, you get this right, Henry. This is not, I came to this community to open my company, raise my family. The damages and the opportunity, and I've given every opportunity to fix this. You have disregarded every piece of document and presentation we presented to you and act as if you've never even read it. So later on, when this thing is a bear on the taxpayer's back, you can blame the county commission and you can blame the county attorney's office. We're not done here yet. We're only getting started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mabe. Any questions for Mr. Mabe? None.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Somebody, I don't know who it is, but go ahead, Jonathan.
Do you have any insight on where this appeal stands right now?
This appeal, sir, has been pending since September of 2009. And it is not simply an appeal of the foreclosure. It is an appeal of a transaction through the FDIC as this property had gone through the So there are very many complex issues there that have national implications, just like this case. So
Are you talking about this appeal or the current bank appeal?
The bankruptcy appeal.
No.
Sir.
No, there's been a separate action that he filed.
I withdrew voluntarily from bankruptcy in an attempt to wipe out the county's inappropriate attempt to purchase my rights. Can you imagine it like being run over by a bus and having the bus driver come to buy your rights to relief, your insurance policy? This is just not ethical, it's immoral, and let the community know that this is where their tax money is being spent. Hiring outside counsel, you're going to need outside counsel. So I would hope that some of these things need to be addressed internally. I believe, and I'll make just another suggestion here. This county needs to implement some protocol for certain things. Vested rights being one of them. In this county, the only person who can ask for a vested rights hearing is me. It was imposed upon me by this action. The other issue is the public records issue. No man should have to approach the highest paid county in the government to look at a document. Secondly, my records have been destroyed. County attorney has no idea how it's done. The investigation's been done. We don't know how it happened. It could have been anybody. Regardless, no protocol has been implemented to prevent that from happening. You can say those records are deleted, but I know better. I've done my own consulting with IT professionals. The only data that we get out of this is from the county, and I don't believe a word of it. When Mr. Polakowicz deals in the context of Ocean Concrete, he is representing his clients, not the community's best interest. So I'm done here tonight, and I wish you all the best. I firmly believe that if I had my chance in front of this board, this objective board, you would have ruled in favor of my vested rights. 8 years of this project, several million. it goes on from there. The damages to my family and my children, unspeakable. But we'll all hear about that later. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mabe.
Jerry Smith, Smith & Associates, which made motion timely. Commissioners, I'd just like to go back to the issue of what we can do. I'm not sure you get right or wrong.
Actually, I think in fact, we have a very narrow thing to decide here. So, we can be very sympathetic to what Mr. Mabe said or not, according to each commissioner's conscience. But tonight, you understand, we have a very narrow thing to decide upon. And we're not judges, and we're not the circuit court and all of those things. And we really have no basis for determining whether or not he has a reasonable claim in front of that court or not. But we have to decide whether. Okay, all right.
And if you'll just indulge me for 3 or 4 minutes.
Of course.
What I wanted to suggest to you is that what Todd Smith suggested to you is an option. You do have the option to table this to see how this plays out in the federal court as to the foreclosure. I simply point out that you had the option back in October to have heard this invested right, which I believe that's still potentially an option available to you, would be to say, let's schedule this for a hearing on the vested rights appeal. If Mr. Mabe prevails at this commission level, that he should indeed have vested rights based on the facts of this, and I believe that he has an extremely strong case on that.
But he doesn't own the property now.
Well, you would issue an order saying he had vested rights, and if he prevails in that foreclosure proceeding, then he has vested rights and he has a site plan approved. So there are other options available here other than simply dismiss my client. He's been dismissed, he's been put off. He came here in October before there was a foreclosure and said, I want my appeal heard. And instead of hearing the appeal, he was told, no, let's delay this case until a foreclosure can happen. And that's a travesty of justice, it truly is. But I just ask you that you think about your options. Your options are not limited solely to dismissal of this appeal. I think that you can remand this to staff. You can table it. You can schedule it for a hearing on the merits of the vested rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question, Mr. Smith, Mr. Chairman. Do we know the status of the foreclosure appeal? Has it been briefed? Has it been scheduled for oral arguments? Any insight you could give us?
I'm representing Mr. Mabe on the foreclosure appeals.
Okay.
So he would have better knowledge as to the current status.
We don't really need to know that.
Mr. McGraw, we update the court monthly on the status of this case.
Yes, sir.
Let them know that the property has changed title back to LMD. And there are just simply an enormous amount of implications involved in this. It's very technical, and it's been going on for a year and a half. Mr. Blackowicz could probably attest, or certainly Joe Smith would, if it didn't have any merits and the wrong that kicked out. It's been going back and forth here, and I am updating. I recently updated the appeals court, letting them know that we still, just because this foreclosure has transpired, there are a lot of things that I want answered. I want to exercise the oral argument. I anticipate.
I understand, sir. I guess my question and Dr. Day's question was, where are we along the timeline as far as the appeal? Have you filed your initial brief? Has there been an answer brief filed? Are you scheduled for oral arguments? I filed the initial brief. I filed the pro se in the appeals court.
Filed my brief. LNB responded. We went back and forth. Summary judgment, motion to dismiss. It's gotten past all of that. And there was a number of discrepancies with regards to who had action in Tennessee against LMD, there's action here in Palm Beach, in the bankruptcy courts, and it has been an ongoing battle. I can't tell you exactly where it is. Procedurally, we've gotten through all the briefs to respond to the motion to dismiss. It has not been dismissed. I expect to hear that my day. And some of the implications that and the travesties, some of the things that I were dealing with there are currently being executed on the public day. And it is of great concern. There's been a lot of attention from the Obama administration to take a look at these things, and it's something, again, that I've been touching on years ago, and now it seems to be coming to an end. So I am hopeful that the questions I have raised and the questions the administration have now raised will all meld together.
Thank you.
As far as time frames, sir, I have no idea. At this point now, a year and a half plus, who knows what the time frame is with the court. We're waiting for our day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think there's enough reason for us to sit and wait this one out and see what happens in the appeals court. I'll make a motion that we just table this.
I'll second that.
Discussion? I'll just say that I agree with that because I have no basis for judging the merits of Mr. Mabe's case, but I feel like if we were to dismiss this here tonight, it would be in some ways making a judgment about the merits of that case. So I say we just leave it open, and if he prevails, I think the next few steps for us will be self-evident. We just leave it open for now.
Alan, I'm just out of curiosity. I'm not sure does our action add any weight to the case one way or the other?
Any weight to his
if we don't dismiss, or does that imply that we think that any implication positively or negatively toward him, whereas if we dismiss, there's a different implication?
No, and whatever implication might arise is just in this room. It's not like the appellate court can consider it. The appellate court considers the record in front of it from the trial court. Obviously, right. This board's decision does not become part of that record. So, as I said, frankly, if they had come to us,
I guess the only part that bothers me is why there was no written notification when we requested it as a county, why they didn't respond in any fashion, and then you come here tonight like there's something here. When the county is politely asked in writing, and any lawyer or any accountant knows that you at least reply, or I would think they would reply. That's the only negative taste I have about this. I don't mind waiting. I think it's fine. But because of that, I felt like it was not probably worth continuing on. But I don't have. That's the only problem I have with it.
Commissioner, Mr. Polakowicz has said in the paper, long before I lost title to this property, that he would allow me to come back as a tenant, not an owner. And I'm not coming back as anybody's tenant. I'm coming back as an owner. And this, in the end, I will say this, throughout the process, public notice, proper notice violated a handful of times. Well, this one here, sir, I got 5 times this week. Okay, so it was over notice. I was well aware of it. But it remains the same. I mean, I am not willing to come in here. Mr. Polakowicz was more than happy to give that opportunity to some third party with impending doom for me over this. Any objective board, after years of trying to fight this, would have at least given me an opportunity. I would have taken the denial and moved on.
Okay, well, right now we have a motion on the table, and it's seconded to table this. Can we take a vote?
Mr. Chairman?
I can't. I'm not going to support the motion.
I think there was one more person from the public that wanted to be heard. I'm not sure.
While we're in motion?
No, there was a motion and second. I believe this gentleman was holding up his hand here. I didn't know if he wanted to speak or not.
What gentleman?
Yes, sir.
He didn't even take the oath.
He didn't do an oath, and it's not a public
If he could be sworn in.
In the interim, can I ask a question, George? Was your question answered?
No, well, it was answered in the fashion. I mean, he just didn't want to do it. I mean, I think that there's
Sir,
obviously.
Before you speak, could you just raise your right hand so I can swear you in, please? Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Your name and address, please.
My name is Richard Brown. I live at 14155 81st Avenue, Sebastian. There's usually so many times there's two sides to everything, and I'm the other side. Me and my family own land adjoining Ocean Concrete property. He has 8-point-something acres, I forget what it is. FEC Railway and our property is his only neighbors. We've been waiting for all these years to get this thing settled. We got 186 acres sitting there, and we'd like to have the opportunity to sell it if that comes up. But we certainly want to be able to explain to whoever buys it what's going to go in on that 8 acres. And I think it's time that this has come to a head, and let's do something about it. It's just not right. Somebody else ought to get some kind of a favor here or something. But we're just tired of waiting on it. Another thing is that, if I remember right, I'm not a student of the law, of course, but whenever the courts opened the thing up so that they asked or told the county to go back and give Mr. Mabe a chance to do his vested rights thing, okay. But there was a stipulation in there, if I remember right, and that was that if it ever changed hands, nobody else could ever use that authorization from the court to pursue vested rights. I thank you.
Thank you.
You can ask Stan or you can ask Alan or somebody about that, but I think that's right.
Now to bring us back full circle, because we were open for discussion, we took some testimony. There was a motion and there was a second, and we're still in the discussion period for that original motion, which was to table.
But the bottom line is the ownership issue is still in dispute. It has not been decided by the courts. It's still an appeal. So I don't see we're any different than we were previously.
Well, the dilemma there, and the only difference I have is that, and I'm not sure, the reason I keep asking about the difference it makes in the court case is that I'm not sure why the intensity is on either side to do this right away, but the reality is that the property has changed hands. Yeah. And I do not support the motion.
From what he's implying, it was done illegally.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah, but George's point is there is no third standard. There's ownership authorization by an authorized agent.
That's our understanding.
But if the court backs out the changing of ownership and gives it back to Mr. Mabe, then his vested rights would still be vested rights if he has them. I mean, just because something happened illegally that changed hands, and if that gets corrected,
the appeal would still be open. The appeal would still be open.
And that's what I've been trying to find out if we voted no, and then does that override us as well? Even if we dismissed it, do we get overridden, or is it gray? I mean, that was why I was asking.
No, I think, frankly, based on everything we've heard tonight, I'm perfectly happy that you go ahead and table it. Let that appeal run its course. If Mr. Mabe thinks he's got a good appeal, obviously the foreclosure court didn't agree with him, and the appellate court on the motion for stay found that there was not a likelihood of winning that appeal. But I don't have a problem in the world in giving him every opportunity on that appeal.
I understand. Okay. But, I mean, I'm not sure if it overrides that, why it wouldn't override us at the same time, but that's okay.
Why it wouldn't reinstate it? Because there are two separate legal proceedings. And, the safer way to do it, if you want to keep that option open, is, as I say, just table it then.
And that's the second time Mr. Polakowicz has said that, and that weighs heavily with me. Yeah. It weighed heavily with me the first time. So.
We ready for a vote? All in favor of the motion to table, say aye.
Aye.
All against?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Good to see government work. Actually work.
Item 7A, can I just turn this over to you fellas?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a discussion item, so this is not a formal hearing or recommendation. But as you all are aware, and just as a bit of a recap, this is kind of part of a planning cycle where we had the evaluation and appraisal report a few years ago. That was approved. We had comprehensive plan amendments that were adopted based on some of the recommendations approved in that report. And now we're in the kind of the final phase of implementing policies that are already adopted and codifying them, putting them in the land development regulations. And at the same time, we're taking the opportunity to clean up some land development regulation issues and to update the land development regulations. We've already had 2 sets for discussion purposes before you all, and based on input in August and then in December, we've made changes to the first 2 sets. This is the 3rd and final set in terms of discussion. We'll get some input from you all a little bit later. Then the process will be to have a public workshop and then a formal Planning and Zoning Commission and formal Board of County Commissioner hearings later this spring. What I'd like to do now is go through what's already presented to you in the staff report and the proposed ordinances in the backup. And if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, to go through those, if you would like, we can go through kind of one subsection at a time, if you'd like to do it that way, or go through all of them.
Very briefly.
Is there a game on tonight?
No, but this is the 3rd go-around. We've all read it very carefully, and we'll have questions, I'm sure, if there's any specific thing that concerns us.
Sure.
So I would ask you to be very brief.
Okay. I'll go through
number 1, number 2, number 3.
Through the sections, and
Does anybody have any questions on that?
Yeah, maybe.
We're here to
Does
answer.
anybody have questions?
Yeah.
I mean, we could just skip straight to questions.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'd be glad to do that.
Does anybody have any questions?
I don't.
He's going to be a good chairman, I can tell.
I only had one little thing that I want to say, and it's not necessarily specific. Well, you're going to be hearing more from this chairman as we move through this, and I know this isn't enacted yet, about the section in our code that says we must evaluate the effect of any of these things on the affordability of housing in the county. And so when I hear about reuse lines going off-site up to a mile off-site and things like that, I always have in my mind, sure, there's a public good, and that's an important thing, but I always have the question about what kind of costs we're shifting onto the back of, homeowners and things like that. So I just have a general comment that I'll be asking more questions like that. And it was made clear to me the last time that we did this that, this isn't the proper time in the process of this for those studies to be conducted. But I'll want them conducted on some of these things.
Certainly.
Per the code.
All right, I have one question, and this is on 918 sanitary sewer and potable water.
Which attachment?
Attachment 4, page 3. At the bottom of the page, D, it says all wet lines and package treatment plants shall be dedicated to the county. And it used to say for operation and maintenance, shall be dedicated to the county for operation and maintenance. Has there been an intent changed in that, or can you explain to me?
Yeah. I think the intent there actually was just to go from must to shall. And I guess my question is, in what other portion of
Okay, up in 6, above that is all crossed out.
Right.
And this ordinance used to say must dedicate the plants to the county for operation and maintenance. And I'm just wondering if not specifying for operation and maintenance is an intended change to imply something that I don't see.
I think the intention here is back when, and you'll notice the 2010 reference to the urban service area, this provision was put in the very early 1990s, and we don't really have circumstances where people are building package plans.
We hadn't built one in years.
Correct. And so we don't even need this reference in the ordinance anymore. We don't have those circumstances where that occurs.
I had a question about the free expression sign. What is a free expression sign? Is this a limitation on our constitutional rights here?
No, actually, it's an acknowledgement of it. Bob and Roland have been dealing with this. The city of Vero Beach. We coordinated with them on kind of this terminology. So I'll let Bob talk about it.
I think all of our sign regulations really are controlled by court decisions, and the courts value political speech more than any other type of speech. We can put restrictions on commercial speech much more so than on political speech. And we've recognized for a while that there was a missing element in the sign code. If you remember a few years ago when there was a proposed 5-laning of 43rd, I can't remember whether it was a 4-laning or 5-laning of 43rd Avenue south of State Road 60. We had people putting up signs in their front yards, no 5-laning, and that is a type of free expression sign that we should have allowed. We didn't have specific provisions for it, but we didn't take any enforcement action. What this is going to do is specifically acknowledge in our sign code that people do have the right to express political opinion on their property, and we're actually allowing that through our sign code. So it's not a limitation. It's, like Stan said, it's an expansion consistent with findings of the court in a number of cases.
It's the Occupy Vero Beach, huh?
I noticed we've added the carried sign as well. Is that to allow for dancing out in front of HR blocks and the pizza place or whatever on the streets?
I think that's another case that our ordinance was silent on that.
Right.
And we're acknowledging that, I don't know if it's a big difference carrying a sign or wearing a T-shirt. So basically we're acknowledging that someone can.
The sandwich boards are okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is another instance.
Well, if it's they can. Yeah. They can wear a sandwich board. They can't put one down and leave it and go away.
Mm-hmm. You can do that in Sebastian. There's a
wear it and leave it.
Leave it. There was an instance, and it's the first time I have seen this, a truck, a box truck, with LED lights on signs on every surface.
I saw that.
And as he's driving down the street, the sign keeps changing. Now, I'm going down US 1, all right, about 5 miles, and every red light I come to is 3 or 4 rear-end collisions, right? Because they're all distracted. Because every time the sign changes, you look at it.
Yeah.
Are we addressing that anywhere in this near future?
Yes. Actually,
we are?
Roland Du Bois, Chief of Environmental Planning and Code Enforcement.
Yeah.
Under, we had a section previously that we've revised related to signs on vehicles and parked vehicles being used essentially as roadside signs.
See a lot of that.
Trying to regulate that. Well, we did expand it. If you look on page attachment 9, I think it's page 7 of attachment 9, where we call it, it's an electronic sign affixed to a trailer or vehicle. What this does.
But it says a trailer or vehicle parked.
Right. We're not. What this would not do is prevent it while it's moving down the road. We feel we didn't really have the jurisdiction for that. But if it is parked, it should not be running.
It stops at a red light. Does that constitute park?
I tell you, it is more of a hazard going down the street than it is parked on the side of the road. Is there nothing we can do about that?
Is the county liable if one of these vehicles, because of these moving signs on their truck, causes a wreck because we have allowed it by hook or by crook? Are we liable? No.
Bill's saying no.
No. But you bring up a good point. We didn't really. We didn't think of the distraction characteristics of these going down the road, but it might be something to think about.
I think
we can look into.
I think there might be some. We'll have to get with the attorneys. I'm just thinking there might be some commerce road issues, but we can certainly look into it.
Okay.
My first
I can
thought would be...
see it on somebody's property, but when it's moving down the road and it's a visible distraction from people driving, I think that we've opened a Pandora's box there that needs to be addressed.
Is the little elephant bobbing up and down a distraction? Is the wrap that's on a pickup truck advertising for construction or generators, is that a distraction?
The Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. What about that? That's a distraction.
The biggest distraction.
The Oscar Mayer Wienermobile is not lit up at night going down the road.
Right.
And these things are.
Not
and
yet.
I've been behind one twice.
Not yet.
Oh, good. He's had that experience too.
And I just found it, all I could imagine was if I was 70 years old and driving down the road and I suddenly saw a red sign go by, I might think there was a red light, and I stop and the people behind me run into the back of me.
And these things are much more common in larger urban areas. I think if anybody's been to Las Vegas, they see them frequently up and down the strip.
Well, we don't want to see them here.
But you guys are going to look into it for us and get back to us,
will.
right? You'll get back to us on it. Okay.
Stan, as with set 1 and 2, I went through and I had a number of questions, and I don't think there's any point in me asking those questions now. I've got it written out for you. If there's a question, it's either because it was confusing or I simply didn't understand it within the context. So you can take them and look at them for what they're worth, and if you have any questions on my questions, just get in touch with me.
Great, I appreciate that.
Okay, I have one more question. Attachment 10. This is on the ag.
Uh-oh.
All right. Under 15A, it says districts requiring administrative permit approval, A2 and A3. That's for the small-scale plants. The large-scale plants say districts requiring administrative approval, Ag 1, Ag 2, and Ag 3. What was your reasoning that it was not required in Ag 1 for the small-scale processing plants?
Well, what we did was follow the wording of the policy that's been adopted, that and for small scale it references A2 and A3, and I think the reasoning there was in a little bit further out in a little more remote area that these can be staff level approval. And you've got large areas out there, and you can have large buffers and setbacks associated with it. Because there's a couple of components of this policy, and one of them is that these would be staff level approval. Let me give you just an idea of the scale that we're talking about. That for small scale, 20 acres or smaller for the footprint of the plant and feedstock area and so forth. If you're familiar at all with the INEOS project, with their total footprint, including the feedstock area, I'm not sure you can really see that or notice that from the road, that's south of all of the equipment. Their footprint is roughly 40 acres for the size facility they have. So this is still a pretty large facility. It's up to 20 acres, and the idea was that in order for that to be staff level approval, it needs to be in the A2 or A3 areas. The large scale facility, I think the reason that's allowed in A1 is because it's got a more thorough process. It has a special exception process. So there'll be notice and public hearings.
So you're saying if it's small scale, it has to come before planning and zoning in Ag 1?
No.
It's the opposite.
Small scale is not.
Small scale, administrative permit, no planning and zoning.
Correct. But it's only in the A2 and A3 districts.
And 20 acres or less.
So are you saying it's only allowed in A2 and
Yes,
A3?
that's
Or
correct.
if it's in A1, it has to come before P&Z, A2 and 3, it only comes before you?
No.
Okay. So it's not allowed in A1 at all?
That's correct, because it's not staff level.
Okay. Why is it a large-scale processing plant allowed in A1 under your approval process? I must be missing something somewhere.
Right. I think if I get your point, it is why would you allow a large-scale plant and not a small-scale plant in A1?
Yes.
Is that it in a nutshell? I think the idea there in the policy was that there could be some areas. We've got some just east of 74th Avenue, the landfill, that it might make sense that you would have a large scale there. We do have the ability to add a small scale into the A1 district. We don't have to follow the policy, but I think anything that we did in the A1 district, you'd want to go through public hearing process.
Mostly, the small-scale plants will be done on property they'll be gathered, if you did one of these and you were supplying it, you would put it on site. You'd be on your property, you'd have a bigger area west of town, you'd be growing it and putting it through your plant. You're not going to put a small-scale plant in town. It's going to be it'll be an Enos, it'll be something big. It's not going to be little small plants, because small plants are really only supply-based for land that's supplying to them. You're not going to have one here in the farm out west of town. You'll put it on the process on the farm.
Well, this doesn't say it's not allowed in Ag 1, the small scale.
Well, I mean, Ag 1 doesn't want to be not allowed anything, so we just leave it not allowed.
All right, then what's the approval process for that in Ag 1?
They call the league.
Well, the other thing I do want to point out,
call the IRNA.
In the criteria, there's a 1 mile separation from the urban service area, and there's large setbacks, 600 feet. So you have to have a large site in the A1 district.
Right, you can't.
Okay,
I'm not sure that there are any.
What's the approval process for a small-scale plant in Ag 1? They just ask and we shall receive?
No, there is no, as proposed, there is no process for small scale in A1.
That's what I thought. Okay, should we be adopting a process for small scale in Ag 1 is my question.
We could add that in. I don't believe that it would be appropriate for it to be staff level, even for small scale in A1.
Okay.
So
right.
That's something we can look at.
So is there something somewhere that says if you want to do a small scale bioplant in Ag 1 that has to go before P&Z?
Not at this time.
I think his assumption is if any size project came into Ag 1, you'd have to be special exception, right?
Special exception or administrative.
This is only dealing with staff level approval.
Right.
Well, staff level approval is allowed for a large scale bioplant in Ag 1. Doesn't that seem a little unusual?
Depends on who's I mean.
Yeah, depends on
Be careful, George. I agree with
Yes, thank you.
But I think what you're getting at is undeniably true, that biofuel plants have a relatively lower level of scrutiny because probably, one, because they're an ag, and two, because it's probably deemed that it's a public good and it's something that we want to attract to our county. I mean, that's all I can conclude from the way that this is written. It has a lower level of review in terms of elected officials, appointed officials, et cetera, than something otherwise might.
There seems to have been a lot of discussion recently about things going in ag, and I think what I would like to see done is that we take large-scale processing plants and small-scale processing plants in Ag 1 and put them through the standard P&Z process for approval, and not be a staff-level approval.
Right. And large-scale is proposed as special exception. So
in Ag 1.
In A1.
Has to be approved by P&Z then?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So I think
we should make the same process for Ag 1 small-scale.
Yes.
Special exception.
Right, and the policy does not address that. So what we could do then, what I mean hear you say is create a process for small scale in A1, but don't make it staff level approval. Come to Planning and Zoning Commission, for instance, and make it an administrative permit.
What I hear saying is it should be the same for large scale and small scale if it's in A1. The policy
special
should be the same.
exception.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
We can add that in.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good job. Good catch. You're going to be all right, buddy. You're going to survive this. Any other questions on this, or can we move on to Commissioners' Matters?
We can move on to Commissioners' Matters. I'm done. Okay, the only thing that matters for me is that...
We need approval on this?
We need approval.
We got your input. It's just a discussion item.
George, do you want my plaque back? Wesley put me back here?
After that, I'd kind of like you to...
Just
No, I don't want your plaque back. I'll just hang on to it. I hope that,
Any final things from staff?
I'm going to put it under appeal, though.
Okay. We're adjourned.